For most of the 20th century, the old career ladder felt sturdy enough to trust. You got the degree, learned the software, wore the clean shirt, kept your head down, and climbed rung by rung toward a nicer title, a larger paycheck, and the vague hope that one day you would speak in meetings with the calm authority of a man who had survived enough calendars. That ladder-shaped family expectations, school guidance, office culture, and a good deal of modern self-respect. AI is breaking that arrangement. It is not merely changing work, it is changing the structure people assumed work would have. That is the part that rattles people. Jobs can change without breaking a worldview. Ladders do not. The old ladder made sense in an economy that rewarded information handling. If you could format the report, clean the spreadsheet, summarize the meeting, draft the memo, translate one department's jargon into another department's jargon, and politely chase people for approvals, you had a place. Maybe not a glamorous place, but a stable one. Companies were full of work that consisted of moving information from one box to another, while pretending each transfer was a minor act of civilization. That world is now under pressure because AI can do a shocking amount of that work quickly, cheaply, and without asking whether this could all have been an email. That shift sounds technical until you see its human meaning. The first rung of the ladder used to be dull on purpose. Young workers handled repetitive tasks, learned the flow of the organization, absorbed context, and gradually earned trust. They did the parts nobody admired because those parts were how one became useful. But if AI can now draft the first version, prepare the summary, compare the options, answer the routine questions, and clean up the prose, then the first rung no longer looks like training. It starts to look like an avoidable labor cost. That is why so many younger workers feel uneasy, even when the economy is not in outright collapse. The problem is not only unemployment, it is the sense that the promised path no longer leads where it said it would. People can see the building. They are less confident they can get in. College graduates feel this especially hard because they were trained for a prestige economy built on credentialed information work. Study hard, learn the systems, master the corporate dialect, become employable by becoming administratively legible. Then a machine arrives that can rewrite the email, build the summary, outline the proposal, compare the notes, and answer the standard questions in seconds. It is not perfect. It still makes mistakes. It still hallucinates, which is the polite term for making things up with the breezy confidence of a vice president on a quarterly call. But it is already good enough to shrink the amount of human labor needed for a large band of entry-level and mid-level office tasks. That helps explain why recent layoffs feel different from the old recession story. Firms still use the usual language about restructuring, productivity, and strategic focus. Corporate America remains committed to describing an axe as a realignment opportunity. Yet AI keeps appearing in the background, not always as the sole cause, but very often as the quiet accomplice. Even when AI is not the whole story, it is changing what executives think a smaller workforce can accomplish. That sounds ominous until you remember what the old ladder often rewarded. It did not always reward excellence. It often rewarded endurance. It rewarded people who could tolerate repetitive process, decode unspoken office customs, and survive years of low-grade administrative drudgery without openly losing the will to live in a conference room with a speakerphone from 2011. Many ladders were not noble pathways to mastery. They were waiting lines with business cards. AI is breaking them, partly because too much of the ladder was built from tasks that never deserved that much human life in the first place. That is where the optimistic case begins. If a machine can handle more of the paperwork, more of the draft language, more of the rote comparison, and more of the procedural churn, then the value of the human shifts upward. Judgment matters more. Taste matters more. Trust matters more. Problem framing matters more. Human beings become less valuable for being clerks with nice vocabulary, and more valuable for doing what the machine still struggles to do well, making responsible choices in messy reality. That is why the line people often use, AI is replacing humans, is too simple to be useful. In many cases, AI is replacing bureaucratic padding. It is embarrassing a certain kind of white-collar mediocrity that was able to look respectable because the system paid so much for process management. A surprising number of careers were built on being better than average at moving text, extracting points from meetings, and sitting in between one step and the next. AI is very good at humiliating occupations whose hidden purpose was to turn time into formatting. That is painful for the people standing on those occupations, but it is not proof that human beings are becoming unnecessary. It is proof that a lot of office work was less profound than advertised. The people likely to do well in the next phase are those who can define problems instead of merely processing them. The machine can answer a prompt. It still depends heavily on someone knowing which prompt matters. It can summarize the options. It still depends on someone knowing which trade-off is morally acceptable, commercially wise, or politically survivable. It can produce 10 drafts. It still depends on someone knowing which one sounds sane and which one sounds like a clever machine trying to impersonate a manager who skipped breakfast. That means the new premium falls on discernment. And discernment is a much more dignified human specialty than inbox maintenance ever was. This also changes what professional identity has to rest on. For decades, many people built self-respect around being the person who knew the process. They knew the software, the templates, the approval chain, the internal system, the meeting rhythm, the order of signatures, the secret map through the maze. That knowledge still matters. Organizations do not run on vibes alone. But procedural fluency is becoming less defensible as a core identity. The machine learns procedure fast. A person who defines himself mainly by administrative competence is building his house on a cheap foundation. Public sector workers are feeling this too. Once bureaucracies start adopting AI at scale, this stops being a quirky conversation for tech firms and freelancers. It becomes a broad feature of modern work. The machine is moving from novelty to plumbing. Once that happens, a society has to rethink how it trains people, evaluates people, and promotes people. Men are likely to feel this break sharply because so much male identity in modern societies has been organized around linear advancement. Start low, work hard, rise steadily, become respectable, provide. That story was never the whole truth, but it was a powerful script. It gave shape to ambition. It turned professional progress into proof of manhood. AI makes that script less reliable because it destabilizes the rungs themselves. A man may do everything he was told, collect the credentials, develop the software fluency, accept the dull entry role, and still discover that the path ahead has been partially eaten by automation and managerial redesign. That can feel humiliating. It can also be clarifying. The clarification is this: if status ladders become less stable, then masculine worth has to rest less on bureaucratic assent and more on character. Discipline matters more. Reliability matters more. Courage matters more. The ability to build something useful matters more. The capacity to protect, guide, teach, fix, decide, and endure matters more. That is harder than climbing the old ladder, but it is also healthier than confusing manhood with surviving enough meetings to inherit a better swivel chair. AI may strip away an old prop, but it can force a better foundation. Women will feel this shift too, especially in highly educated white-collar sectors where routine cognitive work has long served as the gateway to advancement. The broader point is that the social contract tied to office life is fraying. Parents, schools, and career counselors have been giving advice suited to a world where the ladder was slow but dependable. The new world looks less like a staircase and more like uneven terrain. It rewards quicker learning, tool mastery, initiative, reputation, and the ability to produce obvious value. That is not always fair. It is often stressful. It is also more honest about how competitive economies actually work once the paperwork becomes cheap. Education, therefore, has a serious problem. For years, the system implied that security came from credential accumulation, degree, internship, entry-level role, promotion. Repeat until mortgage. But when AI can already perform a chunk of the work once assigned to early career graduates, generic credentials lose some of their old magic. Expertise still matters. Training still matters. Serious study still matters. But the market premium is shifting toward those who combine knowledge with initiative, judgment, communication, and technical leverage. Schools that keep training students for routine knowledge work may be preparing them for a labor market that is evaporating while the brochure remains unchanged. That does not mean everyone must become a coder, a founder, or some melodramatic internet caricature of a future-proof hustler. A civilization cannot be staffed entirely by podcast guests. It does mean more people will need to think in terms of capability stacks rather than single-lane identities. The worker who understands a domain, uses AI tools well, communicates clearly, earns trust, and can ship useful results will be harder to replace than the worker who merely knows the procedure. The new security is less about title inheritance and more about becoming difficult to ignore. That is demanding, but it is also an upgrade over systems that treated young workers as apprentices in spreadsheet purgatory. This is one reason entrepreneurship, freelancing, and portfolio careers may continue to grow in importance, even for people who remain inside formal organizations. If AI lowers the cost of producing drafts, research, visuals, analysis, and coordination, then smaller teams can do more. Individuals can do more. Side ventures become more plausible. Specialized workers can combine tools and expertise in ways that would have required a whole mini department 10 years ago. The old ladder assumed value was created mainly inside large structures and distributed upward through rank. AI makes smaller, sharper combinations of talent more viable. That can be destabilizing for institutions. It can be liberating for people with initiative. This is landing in a period of real anxiety, not in some cheerful vacuum. That matters because AI disruption hits hardest when confidence is already soft. People tolerate structural change more easily when the alternative paths look open. They panic when the ladder is cracking and the ground below looks crowded. That is why leaders who talk about AI as though it were a purely technical upgrade miss the social question. This is not only about productivity, it is about legitimacy. If the old bargain promised that diligence and compliance would deliver upward mobility, and that bargain weakens, then societies have to replace it with something more believable. Telling people to be flexible is not enough. They need ways to become more capable. They need training that reflects real tasks. They need institutions that reward output more than theater. They need a culture that respects builders, teachers, caregivers, craftsmen, founders, and serious operators, rather than merely rewarding the people best at office choreography. There is another upside here that gets too little attention. When machines absorb low-value cognitive drudgery, human effort can move toward higher-value work that was previously crowded out by administration. Better teaching, better products, better strategy, better writing, better service, better design, better care, better local leadership. The old ladder often sorted people by their willingness to do bland information labor for years. AI creates the possibility of sorting more by actual contribution. That will not happen automatically. Plenty of firms will use the tool stupidly. Plenty of managers will use it to produce faster nonsense. Still, the opportunity is real. If used well, AI can shift work upward toward more human forms of value. That is why optimism here is not naive, it is grounded. Technology does create and displace roles at the same time. That is disruptive, yes. But disruption is not the same thing as decline. Sometimes it is surgery on a system that had too much dead tissue. The old ladder is not sacred because it is familiar. A lot of it was inefficient, spiritually flattening, and built to preserve layers of clerical adulthood that had mistaken delay for seriousness. So yes, AI is breaking the old career ladder. It is breaking the clerical ladder, the procedural ladder, the degree-to-desk ladder, the spend 5 years proving you can handle dullness ladder. That will create layoffs, confusion, resentment, and a fresh genre of anxious think pieces written by people who recently discovered the future does not respect their workflow. But it also creates a chance to build a better order, one where the human contribution is less about shuffling information and more about wisdom, judgment, responsibility, taste, and creation. The people who adapt best will not be those who cling to the broken rung. They will be those who learn to climb a wall that no longer looks like a ladder at all. Watch the next video, because this is not really a story about software. It is a story about what happens to a society when the path to status changes shape, and whether we still know how to build men and women who can thrive when the old staircase gives way beneath them. End transmission.